5 years ago, I was incredibly shy. At the time, I was going through a phase of personal growth and was trying to figure out why it was so hard for me to approach someone and get to know them. These issues were really bothering me a lot. One day, I was sitting in a coffee shop with some friends and saw a girl. I looked at her. She caught my eye, and I thought, oh shit. She noticed I was looking at her. At first, I was nervous, and then I realized, wait a minute. She looked at me and smiled. That is, as if to let me know that she didn't mind meeting me. Then my excitement went away. I started thinking about it and analyzing the situation. I realized that when you know whether someone wants to get to know you or not, nothing prevents you from creating a new connection between you. That's how I came up with the idea of Tinder. This quote belongs to Sean Redd, one of the creators of Tinder. The developers of Tinder and other dating apps make billions of dollars every year. Wait, but what? If you think about it, does Tinder, and not only Tinder, make money on, to be honest? And you know the answer. Corporations make money off of a feeling called love. What is love? As you have already realized, the main question of this issue. Perhaps some of you are annoyed by the concept of uncontrollable, inexplicable, indescribable love, which does not depend on the person. And are you annoyed by the infantile position in which a person just floats along? Let's, putting fatalism aside, study the anatomy of love. The essence of this whole issue can be summarized as follows. Love is a fundamental law of living matter, and if we consider living matter to be an extension of non-living matter, then it turns out to be the fundamental law of the entire universe. That is a physical law, like the law of conservation of energy or universal gravitation. Let me explain. A physical law is a stable, objective regularity existing in nature. This is so for the sake of definition. Any law can be used to accomplish its purpose. A watermill or hydroelectric power plant uses gravity and the kinetic energy of water movement so that the millstones of the mill can grind grain into flour to generate electricity. Why do we need this comparison? Any dating app like Tinder and beyond is a watermill, which, however, uses not the energy of water, but the energy of basic human feeling and the natural behavior of the vast majority of people. Simply put, Tinder capitalizes on the desire to meet and have fun. Gravity attracts water and generates energy. Love causes living things to be attracted to each other, reproduce, triggers changes during evolution, and then provokes the emergence of culture. In culture, the phenomenon of love continues to be studied to this day. This issue will not only focus on the biochemistry of attraction, not only on romantic love, it will focus on the anatomy of love. In general, we can think of love as an objective and verifiable law, a universal driver of economics, politics, culture, and art. One of the basic mechanics inherent in living things. Love generates billions of dollars. Love is literally one of the ingredients in the glue that helps the world from falling apart. Recently, the approach to love as a biological process has become increasingly popular. On the other hand, it is impossible to simply dismiss the trajectory of changing ideas about love. So, let's talk about culture in a blitz format. Ancient people did not have the institution of property, so they entered into short-term relationships without strong attachments. Later, there appears a very important idea of platonic love. Love, the highest. The author, as is clear from the name, was the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. He distinguished between bodily love and heavenly love, which indirectly created the basis for the Christian idea of the sin of lust. Christians regarded love as a gift from God and shocked the ancient Romans and Jews with the ideas that one should marry for love and the prohibition of male adultery and divorce as a defiling gift from God himself. In Arabic and Persian poetry, especially mystical poetry, love is a manifestation of mad and often violent passion that burns lovers alive. Under the influence of the poetry of medieval troubadours, the tradition of courtesan love was formed, which implies sublime service to a beautiful lady, overcoming obstacles and suffering for the sake of love. In the 16th century, a major work on love appears. Romeo and Juliet. Romanticism in the 19th century sought a way of liberation from the rationalistic approach to love and relationships. With the widespread use of mass media and birth control, love became more popular than ever before. Mass culture began to idealize love relationships, creating a new image of love. In Disney cartoons, princes and princesses, I even have to get to know each other well. They know from the beginning that they are meant for each other. A few decades earlier, hippies and New Agers talked about love as a new religion that could change the world. In the 21st century, relationships have become perceived as a personal matter, which means that the requirements for a partner have increased. Now, having created an image of a loved one, we strive to find someone who will share our views and interests in all moments of life, covering all needs: romantic, intellectual, sexual, and ultimately domestic. Summary: love is a physiological mechanism that, over the millennia of our history, has been covered with many layers of collective illusions. That is, interpretations that helped ancient people stick together and understand each other. Parents had children. Children had love affairs. They all had myths. The question then becomes, which love is primary? Romantic love or parental love? That is, maternal love. Surely many people thought maternal. Well, you're wrong. Romantic love, love of intimacy, passion, love of different, unrelated living beings is primary. And you'll understand why a little later. Let's start with romantic love. We are entering the territory of the biochemistry of love. The topic is very popular. There are endless articles and documentary books about the work of the brain during love. But it hasn't always been this way. The worldwide trend of studying the brain during falling in love in the scientific community was started by this woman. Meet Helen Fisher, a leading anthropologist on the biochemistry of love and just a very popular speaker. She has been studying love for over 40 years and has conducted numerous studies, surveys, and brain scans. After such, to say the least, in-depth research, it is a sin not to write a few bestsellers, which, however, she did. In one of her books, Why We Love: The Nature and Chemistry of Romantic Love, Fisher writes the following: romantic attachment makes a person concentrate on one particular object of love and not waste time on those relationships that will not lead to a joint life and reproduction. So how exactly did her research take place? At Stony Brook University, Fisher launched a multifaceted project with graduate students in the psychology department to study falling in love. She was interested in exactly how romantic passion works. To answer that question, Fisher decided to resort to functional magnetic resonance imaging technology to image the human brain in a state of intense falling in love. In addition to magnetic resonance imaging, she used statistical analysis and interviewed people about their experiences of falling in love. Over 6 years, Fisher and her assistants scanned a large number of brains, of which half belonged to people who were madly in love, and the other half belonged to those who had experienced breakups or unrequited love. Having studied humans, she moved on to animals. In the animal world, too, there is a semblance of love at first sight. In it, instant sympathy allows males and females to begin reproduction almost immediately after meeting. This kind of animal behavior, coupled with increased energy, euphoria, passionate aspiration, allowed Fisher to link romantic feelings of humans and animals to the production of common chemicals in the brain: dopamine and norepinephrine. Do you realize how revolutionary this is? Elusive, mysterious, as if intangible love becomes something tangible. The increased concentration of dopamine in the brain explains why lovers experience joyful excitement at the sight of a partner. Excessive release of this neurotransmitter causes a person to experience heightened arousal when a relationship is threatened. An increase in dopamine concentration also leads to the production of testosterone, the hormone of sexual desire. An increase in norepinephrine explains the ability of a person in love to remember minute details and aspects of the behavior of the object of love. When dopamine and norepinephrine levels increase, serotonin levels decrease, and this is very important. Lovers begin to fall into an excitable, half-crazed state, indulge in obsessive fantasizing, ruminating, daydreaming, and may lose their appetite and sleep. But more importantly, Fisher studied the brains of not only those who are happily in love, but also those who have experienced a breakup or not mutual love. The conclusions she reached in the study support her hypothesis about the effects of chemicals. When a lover is rejected by the object of their love, dopamine production does not decrease, it increases. And the increase in dopamine and norepinephrine leads to a gradual decrease in serotonin, an extremely important neurotransmitter that is responsible for stress resistance. Because of its decline, non-mutual lovers experience extreme distress, depression, loss of interest, and loss of will to live. If hell exists, it feels like a breakup, or rather unrequited love. These are the words with which Helen Fisher likes to begin her performances, and as loud as it sounds, it's true. From the brain's point of view, love is the protocol necessary to bring people together and keep them around to give birth and raise offspring. Since prehistoric times, it has been the basis for the survival of the human species. Sexual attraction always comes first and pushes us to meet potential partners. Sympathy allows us to choose the right one among them. And affection helps to create a long-term bond and gives us the strength to cooperate with each other until the parental duty is fulfilled. Here it is logical to ask the question, and what is it all for? In this issue, you will learn how we choose who to love. Why did evolution at one point separated male and female? What is motherhood? Plus, what kind of creature has 7 sexes? And how can love take man to a new stage of evolution? Get ready, the most interesting part hasn't even begun yet. Before you learn about the origin of love, we need to digress a bit and talk about how we choose a partner. Why does communicating with one person trigger this magical protocol and not the other? Obviously, we tend to choose people of the same intellectual and social status as us. Appearance and religious and family values matter too. But Fisher, having worked for many years at Match Group, the company that owns Tinder, believes that all of this overlaps with something deeper, our hormonal type. How did she figure that out? She has worked for many years as chief scientific advisor for the dating site Match. Coleman has analyzed the many thousands of users who are looking for a partner. This has allowed her to identify certain patterns in how some couples form and why others break up, depending on the hormonal type in a person's brain. One of the neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, estrogen, or testosterone, will predominate, and we fall in love with people who seem to complement the formation of our brain. So there were creative and impulsive researchers with a developed dopamine system, requiring constant movement to the new, calm and prudent builders, empathic, sensitive negotiators, and decisive, rational directors. The compatibilities Fisher voices are: the explorer needs an explorer, the builder, a builder, and the negotiator, suddenly, a director. No matter how convincing the categorization of personalities may seem to you, in reality, everything is much more complicated. None of the listed types is not realized in an ideal form, but it becomes obvious that to disperse the dopamine system is effective from all points of view. Only it should be drowned, not with substances, but with new impressions and new knowledge. Being an explorer is extremely useful. It strengthens both your psyche and the position of your figure on the board of society. To visualize what love is at the most fundamental level, we will travel to the deep past. Several billion years ago, 2 of our single-celled ancestors merged into one, blending the contents of their cells into a single cell, chimera. This, by the way, is why romantic relationships are primary. It all began with the union of 2 different creatures. In living nature, almost everything begins with chance, but almost all accidents lead to nothing. We can assume that this was also the case here, and probably in most cases, the sexual adventures of the cells involved ended there. One day, something changed in the chimera, and it began to divide all by itself, entirely with 2 sets of genes that had previously reproduced independently of each other. At that point, the accidentally merged cells became something new, a diploid, whereupon its 2 sets of chromosomes became inherited as one. You could say that's how sexual reproduction came about, but diploidy isn't sexual reproduction, it's a precursor. The fusion of 2 single cells into one double cell is called fertilization. In addition to fertilization, sexual reproduction also requires the reverse process of turning a double cell into a single cell. This process of reverse fertilization is called meiosis. To understand why you need meiosis and sexual reproduction in general, the easiest way is to take the example of those who do not have it. These are, as usual, bacteria. Let's imagine for a second bacterial sex. Let 2 bacteria, in a burst of tenderness, threw off their cell walls and merged, combining their chromosomes. Since each of the bacteria has only 1 chromosome, we have a diploid bacterium with 2 chromosomes. If it decides to pull a meiosis and split that pair of chromosomes into 2 separate cells, the result is exactly the same 2 bacteria that started it all. It's not at all clear why they might need such a pointless cycle. But if each of the partner cells has not 1 but at least 2 chromosomes, then fusion, followed by meiosis, makes sense. The more chromosomes the more new combinations that can be made from them. In fertilization, all chromosomes are mixed together, and in meiosis, each pair of chromosomes is randomly distributed among the daughter cells. If there are 2 chromosomes, then not only 2 original variants are possible, but also 2 other mixed variants. That makes 4. If there are 3 chromosomes, there can be 8 variants. And if there are 23, as we have, it allows to combine them in 8,300,000 possible ways. This recombination, or simply mixing, is the point of sexual reproduction. That is, alternation of fusions and meiosis. That is, decomposition. Sexual reproduction from an evolutionary point of view is not reproduction at all. It is a way to mix one's genes with other people's genes and create new, potentially successful combinations. As a result, moreover, the more different combinations, the better. We can conclude that love, at the most fundamental level, is a combination that leads to the formation of something new. The main reason for the diversity of life forms is the freedom of sexual relations. Sexual reproduction gives females and males in nature, males and females in human society, a choice. But what is a male and what is a female? It is time for us to ask the question, what is the fundamental difference between male and female anyway? You might have thought of secondary or primary sex characteristics about X or Y chromosomes, but these are all too human answers. Plants, for example, have none of that at all. But males and females are nevertheless different. The same applies to bearing a fetus, caring for offspring, and hormonal differences. If poplars or yeast, for example, have males and females, what kind of care for offspring can we talk about? The division into 2 sexes is something more general and applies to all of nature. Sex can be defined in many different ways, which means that the word sex refers to something more abstract than a set of sex chromosomes. But what could be more broad and abstract than any sex characteristics, and even genotype? The sperm cell and the egg cell. And to be even more specific, it's simply the size of the gametes. Sperm cells are smaller in size than egg cells. That's really the only defining difference between male and female. Male is the gender with the small gamete, and female is the gender with the large gamete. This may seem like a trivial distinction, but it is in fact the whole yin-yang of intersexual relations. Is there such a thing as sexual reproduction without sexes? Oddly enough, it does. In this case, the sex cells are externally indistinguishable. This situation is called isogamy, and it's still common among many unicellular organisms. Isogamy is probably the original form of sexual reproduction, but more interestingly, sexual reproduction is also possible with more than 2 sexes. Meet Tetrahymenothermophila. The features of this infusoria were studied by scientists half a century ago. This small microorganism has not 2, but as many as 7 sexes. And among modern eukaryotes, sexual reproduction, in which one gamete is large and the other small, is called anisogamy. In anisogamy, there may be 1,000,000 tiny sperm cells per giant immobile egg cell. What is so evolutionarily attractive about the separation of male and female? That is, anisogamy, the same as any division of labor. In isogamy, each gamete has to find a mate. Everything necessary for further development has to be carried with it. Most gametes won't find a mate, but with anisogamy, one gamete can concentrate on resources and the other on finding one. It's much more efficient. You can stamp out a huge number of cheap, small genetic capsules with tails and spread them out in all 4 directions on the search for a small number of gametes. Immobile but large, expensive, well-packed. Such gametes are called eggs. Male and female sex appear at the moment when one game becomes larger than the other. But once established, this asymmetry of the sexes grows like a snowball. One sex tends toward expensive gametes, the other toward cheap gametes. For one sex, each gamete is important, and it is profitable to provide each gamete with hothouse conditions. And for the other sex, not individual gametes are important, but their number and ability to find as many eggs as possible. Thus, one sex is oriented toward offspring and the other toward finding the former. In addition, since there are many more small gametes than large ones, their producers tend to compete more fiercely with each other. But it is obvious that human relationships are not limited to sperm and egg cells. Of course, Over the following billions of years, the single-cell logic of sexual reproduction has been overlaid with whole layers of genetics and culture, complicating and confusing everything beyond recognition. And yet, it is equally obvious that the origins of all that is male and female in living nature must be sought here, in the fusion of two haploid unicellulars of different sizes. But in addition to the asymmetry of sex roles, the origin of the egg has another consequence. The seed capital that the egg presents to the embryo is not just nutrients, it is time. The resources accumulated in the egg give the organism derived from it the opportunity to develop. The egg gave the diploid cell a childhood and thus paved the way for a fundamentally new stage of life on Earth, a stage of relationships, not at the micro, but at the macro level, the level of animals. The amazing thing is that not only living organisms evolve, but also their relationships. A typical animal spends its adult life alone, only thinking about company when it comes time to reproduce. Sometimes even that is not necessary. A fish, for example, could theoretically hatch from an egg, grow up, lay eggs somewhere, and die without encountering another fish of the same species in its lifetime. But mammals have at least one moment in their lives when we are guaranteed to interact with a related creature. That moment is birth. The institution of motherhood has existed among our branch of mammals since before the dinosaurs. The earliest Paleozoic fossil evidence of offspring care is found in South Africa, the skeleton of a mother and her 4 cubs. Similar family groups were also characteristic of cynodonts, the later Mesozoic synapsids from which mammals evolved. In the Paleozoic amniotic eggs, with their waterproof shell, seemed the pinnacle of evolutionary biotechnology. Thanks to them, amniotes conquered amphibians and spread to every corner of the planet. But in the hard times of the Mesozoic, land eggs became obsolete. Their regulation became most important. Forced to shrink and switch to a nocturnal lifestyle, the ancestors of mammals faced the problem of excessive cooling, which they solved by dramatically increasing the intensity of metabolism. But the shrunken eggs are also cooling at an increased rate, and the embryo itself is still too small to generate its own heat. So, a warm-blooded animal that has warmed itself needs to warm its offspring. To do this, you need to either sit on the eggs all the time or let the offspring form inside yourself. The first option is used by birds. Because of the flight, they cannot carry extra weight on them, so instead, they lay huge eggs that lie in the nest. This is dangerous, because when the bird leaves its offspring, the eggs cool down. Even worse, bird eggs are nature's main fast food. Lots of calories without any effort. But birds fly mostly in the daytime, when the eggs are not so cold, and leave them usually in an inaccessible place, which without wings cannot reach. So, from an evolutionary point of view, they are generally fine. For the ancestors of mammals, this would not have worked because they lived on the ground and had a nocturnal lifestyle. Eggs left behind would inevitably be either eaten or quickly cooled down. Therefore, animals, unlike birds, on the contrary, reduce the eggs to a minimum size, not storing heat or nutrients in them, but simply connecting them to the maternal body from the inside for the entire period of development. This, as you may already realize, is called pregnancy. Intrauterine development allows mammals to develop for long periods of time in constantly warm conditions, which greatly expands the body's capabilities and increases its readiness for adulthood. But in addition to the greenhouse conditions, intrauterine development has a less obvious evolutionary consequence. Live birth provides us with a guaranteed reunion with our mother. So mammals are professional mothers. Even the name of this group of ours reflects nothing less than maternal care for offspring, feeding their babies literally with their own bodies. Mammals care so much for their offspring that they turn their bodies into a walking nursery. Ever since our unicellular ancestors invented anisogamy, that is, the division of labor between female and male gametes, caring for offspring has been almost by definition a maternal affair. The very fact that there are nutrients in the egg is already care at the molecular level. Everything else is just new versions of the same idea. Nevertheless, mammalian moms are not yet aware of their responsibilities. They require chemical preparation by pregnancy to do so. The placenta sends a lot of hormones into the maternal bloodstream during the period of carrying the fetus, without which, for example, a mouse is completely indifferent to its children, unlike a monkey whose maternal instinct can awaken without pregnancy. From this point of view, the attitudes of most mothers and children among mammals can be considered typically reflexive. After all, they are completely controlled by innate mechanisms, do not require learning thinking, and are easily turned off by blocking hormones. At least some of these reflex mechanisms of mothering have become more complex in the course of mammalian evolution. They began to require more conscious involvement on the part of the animals. Training and social adaptation became necessary. And already in socialization, the oxytocin vasopressin system begins to play a major role. Oxytocin, main in women, and vasopressin, main in men, are similar hormones that regulate many bodily and mental functions. For example, oxytocin eases the pain of childbirth. Perhaps its original function is to regulate pregnancy. What's more interesting are its psychological effects. For a long time, oxytocin was considered a love hormone, a positive molecule that ensures the attachment of mother to child and vice versa. And sexual partners fall in love with each other. But this is too primitive an interpretation of human relationships. Humans do have quite specific stimuli that cause the release of oxytocin, and childbirth is the primary and most reflexive one. But in other cases, the release of oxytocin is not just a reflex, but brace yourself, a product of thought. That is, reflection. What causes a person to release oxytocin besides childbirth? Sex, touching, eye contact, talking, but only if you like the person. And that's a huge no, because it's very difficult to explain likability by reflexes. To fall in love, it is not enough to hear human speech or feel human touch. It takes your brain to analyze everything it knows about the person speaking or touching you, and only in the case of general favorability to this person releases a dose of oxytocin into your bloodstream. When oxytocin is in the blood, stress levels decrease, muscles relax, and there is a slight euphoric effect. But as popular as it is to compare love to drugs, oxytocin is not heroin, which produces euphoria, regardless of context or situation. Oxytocin doesn't directly translate into love, but rather it kind of enhances the perception of others. Generosity, trust, and understanding are increased. Recognition of emotion in facial expressions improves. Eye contact in general ceases to be intimidating. That is, oxytocin acts on our ability to mirror other people. Under its influence, we let people into our souls, probe their personalities with our own sensations, and consider their thoughts in our own words. And this, as is easy to guess, leads to soulful conversation, touch, and sex, which is exactly what increases its production. It's a system of stunning elegance. What do conversation, intimacy, touch, eye contact, and labor have in common? These are all actions that are guaranteed to involve two people. The elegance and beauty of this mechanism is that oxytocin, released simultaneously in each of the two bodies, seems to create symmetry. In childbirth, oxytocin is secreted simultaneously in mother and child. It binds them to each other. The more two people with mutual sympathy look into each other's eyes, the more they want to continue to do so. The longer people talk, the more willing they are to talk further. Oxytocin is the chemical response to reciprocity that keeps the reciprocity going. Oxytocin is like a fire that starts with a small splinter and goes out easily at first. But as it grows, it becomes a mighty bonfire that no longer goes out without outside intervention. This is how all long-term, strong human relationships, such as friendship and love, work. Even invertebrates have molecules related to oxytocin, but in synapsids, as motherhood evolved, this hormone was used as a mechanism to bind mothers to their children and children to their mothers. Over time, mothers began not just to perform mechanical rituals, but to deliberately look at their own children and think about what they might need. And following the mothers, we all began to look at each other. Yes, so interested in each other, that eventually we started talking. In fact, mammalian sociality is a form of maternal instinct, extended to other individuals. It's a kind of motherhood plus. Let's put it all together. The ability to understand another individual as oneself is characteristic of many mammals to a greater or lesser extent. Most likely, the prototype of this sociality was the relationship between mother and child, formed in Mesozoic times due to small size, warm-bloodedness, and live birth. But the primate troop that emerged in the Cenozoic is simply a fairground of social organizations. Today, every possible social organization imaginable is found in this troop. Gorillas are characterized by patriarchal harems, with one male and several wives. Gibbons, on the contrary, exemplify a family idyll with father and mother together, caring for offspring. Bonobos prefer communes with multiple males and multiple females. Apparently, this latter communal arrangement was the original one. It appears among primates at the earliest stages of their history, at the same time as the transition to a daytime lifestyle. Coming out of the shadows, primates began to huddle together in groups with common interests, which gradually became more stable and more complex with the development of the brain. Harems and monogamous couples, according to this theory, originated from the commune. But how can we account for this intelligent sociality? That primates began to coalesce into cooperative groups, clearly not reducible to mother-child relationships. For animals to want to cooperate with each other, they must have a very hard time on their own. Why is life hard for solitary primates? Because they're out of the protection of Mistress Night. By climbing the trees, the primates have access to a new niche, not occupied by other large animals. But in such a niche, it was much more comfortable to exist in good light, which naturally gave the primates away during daylight hours. In turn, this presented them with a big problem. It's harder to defend themselves against predators during the day. This problem is so dangerous for a single animal that for the sake of its solution, the genes of monkeys went to cooperation, then gave rise to something unprecedented: altruism. It is the benefits of collective defense that today explain the initial emergence of social groups in the primate troop. And with it, the tendency to enlarge the brain. Among other mammals, sociality is usually linked directly to the care of offspring. Bats, raptors, paired ungulates, and birds are characterized by sharp differences between species living in monogamous pairs and the rest living alone. Paired species have consistently larger brains. It turns out monogamy among mammals is the most complex form of sociality. You have to somehow get a male who by evolutionary default is completely unprepared to take care of anyone, to drop everything and help the female for many years. From the female's point of view, this means being smart about choosing a reliable male and being able to share responsibilities with him. From the male's point of view, it means a complete reorganization of motivations and priorities, which cannot be done without complicating the brain. In primates, the relationship between brain size and group size is direct. Other mammals, the smarter they are, the better they take care of their offspring, and primates are smarter, the more mates they have. In many mammals, maternity plus motherhood is maternity plus paternity. That is paired care of offspring and monogamy. Primates are another matter. Those have historically been concerned, not so much with caring for offspring as with defense against diurnal predators, so their maternity plus society extends to the whole society. Gradually, primates learn to perceive all their tribesmen with the same depth with which parents perceive children and sexual partners perceive each other. As for monogamy, it is also found in primates, but not as an initial variant, but as the next stage in the evolution of the commune. Family primates, gibbons, are descended from group primates, not vice versa. Therefore, unlike monogamous rodents, monogamous apes retain the evolutionary memory of having a large number of friends. The history of man is precisely an example of the transition from communality to monogamy while retaining the ability for group communication. We love our children, our spouses, and our friends. This is where we can think of oxytocin. Interestingly, in humans, the effect caused by a particular person extends to others around them. In a loving mood, it seems that you love everyone and everyone loves you. But in fact, experiments show that this is not quite true. Oxytocin does indeed induce mildly peaceful feelings toward all of your own, not just the person you're talking to, or say kissing. But at the same time, oxytocin has a dark side effect. It increases aggression and distrust towards all strangers. It's just that when you're in a good mood, you don't think about it. Anyway, oxytocin tells an evolutionary story here too. Our sociality isn't just blind love, it's a herd mentality. What we perceive as lovability is actually a heightened contrast between our own and strangers. Our sociality is based on defense against enemies, against constant threat. This is why almost everything bad about human relationships, hatred, prejudice, chauvinism, and war, is associated with the origin of the first primates. At the dawn of life on Earth, communities of genes floating on hydrothermal vents formalized their social relations by isolating their genes from strangers within the confines of a closed cell. Billions of years later, the cells themselves formalized their social relations by isolating their own space from strangers within a closed epithelium, giving rise to numerous animals. In the Cenozoic era, animals, namely primates, similarly formalized their social relations with a mental boundary, isolating their own from strangers and in their own minds. The flowering of the ideas of one's own and another's occurs in the 20th century. It is then that xenophobia, which appeared as a byproduct, formalizes the world chauvinistic trend. The Second World War begins. But it is after the biggest bloodshed in history that people will be able to come closer to a true understanding of love. Before you learn about attachment theory and why understanding its basics can help, we dive into the context. After the Second World War, when the need for socialization of homeless and orphaned children became apparent, the concept of attachment theory emerged. The idea of attachment theory emerged in the 50s and 60s of the 20th century. But in the 40s, it was preceded by the discovery of the phenomenon of pediatric hospitalism, a syndrome that occurs when a child stays for a long time in a hospitalized medical institution. The author of this concept is the American psychologist Renee Spitz, who previously worked in hospitals with children who were there for long periods of time separated from their parents. Spitz noticed that children, especially those under 2 years of age, in conditions of separation from their loved ones, began to lag behind in psychophysical development, despite the fact that they were kept in good and sometimes even better conditions than at home, despite the fact that the children were well fed. These separated children had slower development of thinking, speech, motor skills, delayed walking, poor growth, and weight gain. All of these problems, according to Spitz, occurred in children because of the interruption of the close emotional bond between mother and child. Millions of children around the world were left without parents due to warfare. It is obvious to any modern person, the scale of the catastrophe is enormous. But for the adults who lived through the war, the problem of orphans did not seem so serious. They did not realize that the whole subsequent life depends on childhood, that the absence of parents irrevocably traumatizes tens of millions of children. It was this man who was destined to revolutionize the scope of what happened and change psychiatry forever. His name is John Bowlby. He is a British psychoanalyst who worked as a psychiatrist at a children's hospital in London. In 1952, he made a documentary called A 2-Year-Old Goes to Hospital. It shows a 2-year-old girl in a hospital without her mother. Her protest, grief, and adaptation is shown. Bowlby later used his movie to change the practice of children's hospital visits. He pushed for children to be hospitalized with their parents when possible, first in London and then throughout the UK. And in 1958, John Bowlby makes a paper on the nature of the child's attachment to the mother, in which he outlines the basic premise of his theory. Bowlby believes that human beings possess an innate attachment system. It is activated in early childhood and is a universal survival mechanism that emerged during evolution. Recall that any mammal still needs to mature after birth. Attachment is a close emotional bond between a child and its parents. A newborn needs a secure, close adult who, while feeling attached to the child, would guarantee security and fulfill all of the child's basic needs. Now, for us, the key thing is this. Bowlby argued that the experience of relationships with parents at a very early age is the most important and creates a pattern of relationships for the rest of life with all other people. Bowlby is later asked by the World Health Organization to do a report on the mental state of World War children. This allowed Bowlby to create a research group that did extensive work on the emotional state of orphaned children, and the results of this work gave Bowlby confidence that his conclusions were correct. A report for the World Health Organization strengthened his position in the scientific community and impressed many young scientists. Some of them subsequently joined Bowlby's research group. Among them was Canadian Mary Ainsworth, who conducted the unfamiliar situation experiment, thereby creating the famous attachment types you know. The unfamiliar situation experiment was as follows. First, a mother and child entered the playroom. Time was given for the child to get used to the new environment. Then a stranger entered the room. At the next stage, the mother went out, leaving the child with the stranger. Then she would return. The stranger would come out. Then the mother would go out again, leaving the child alone. In the penultimate stage, the stranger would enter the room with the child alone, and at the end, the mother would return to the room, and the stranger would leave. The children's behavior was very different and very distinctive in each of the episodes. Ainsworth assessed how the child behaved when the mother left the room. how ready the child was to explore the new situation, what reaction the child gave to the presence of a stranger, and finally, how they react to being reunited with their mother. 20 minutes, 7 episodes, and 4 criteria that gave birth to 3 attachment types that revolutionized psychology. Reliable type. The child behaved confidently in all situations, if there was not even a mom around. A person with this type of attachment considers himself worthy of love and trustworthy of those around him. He does not avoid intimacy and feels comfortable with his partner, is not afraid of rejection, honestly expresses his feelings, and does not lose his identity. Such a person is straightforward about everything. Casual relationships are not peculiar to him. Anxious type. Children with this model of attachment constantly tried to stay close to mom, watched where she was, and were not interested in toys. They cried when mom left, but after her return, they would reach for her or push her away. At home, the mothers of these children behaved ambivalently. They were affectionate and responsive, then suddenly became distant and stopped responding to the child's calls. A person with an anxious attachment type tends to idealize others and belittle himself. He wants intimacy, but has difficulty trusting his partners. Avoidant type. These children appeared completely indifferent to both the coming and going of their mother. At the same time, they cried at home and showed more negative emotions in moments of separation from mom than children with secure attachment. Their independence and avoidant behavior was a defense mechanism to help them survive separation from their mother. They shunned her, pulled out of hugs, looked away. In home observations, these mothers consistently rejected the child. A person with an avoidant type of attachment is characterized by praising himself, but perceive others as untrustworthy, unreliable people. In relationships, he tries to keep a distance, does not tolerate the violation of personal boundaries. However, later, the 4th mixed type of attachment was formulated. A person with this type of attachment sees both himself and others as a failure. He craves intimacy, but being in a relationship is uncomfortable for him. He cannot trust his partner and does not consider himself worthy of love. The patterns of his behavior are always something between the avoidant and anxious type. Because of this type of attachment becomes the most unpredictable. It is important to realize that the human brain is neuroplastic and continues to change, even in adults. Therefore, attachment types are nothing but a gradient. There are only 4 attachment angles. Some of us can be here, some of us can be here, and some of us can be here. We've already talked about this closer to the beginning. No type, no, even the most tested classification will ever be represented in absolute form in any human being. Ever. After birth, each of us is a malleable clay from which parents and environment can make anyone. When we interact with a child, we always leave our imprint in the child's mind. This imprint is bound to manifest itself in the future when a person meets his or her soulmate. The idea of the other half also belongs to the ancient Greeks. In Plato's dialogue, the feast comedian Aristophanes tells a myth about androgynous, creatures who encroached on divine power. Each had 4 arms and legs, and 2 faces, looking in different directions. Fearing that Androgynous would conquer Olympus, Zeus ordered the androgynes to be cut in half. This is how people with 2 arms and 1 face were created. The divided halves were scattered over the earth and tried to find each other, but never reached the lost wholeness. The idea of the other half in culture has evolved and to some extent still persists today. Today, however, because of advances in psychiatry, we are moving away from mystical thinking. Slowly, and not without difficulty, people are coming to realize the need to work on relationships. Something once magical and unexplainable is getting more and more scientific justification. More and more people are realizing that forming a happy relationship requires attention and effort. Despite this positive trend in the heads of many remains the image of love at first sight, a relationship that will be harmonious by default. All this is a great misconception, leading to monstrous consequences, to the multiplication of unhappiness. Relationships need to be worked on. In any, even the most passionate relationship, one day, there comes a point when the dream partner no longer seems like a dream partner to you. It is usually at this point that unions fall apart. In some couples, it comes earlier. In some, after 15 years of living together. Having survived the breakup, we rush in search of the same partner. But as soon as we find him, the vicious cycle from admiration to disappointment repeats again. What's the cause? What we perceive as the end of the relationship, in fact, is nothing more than another stage of the relationship, and in some cases, even the beginning of a real, long and strong love. Psychotherapist Jed Diamond built $1 million business while COVID. He has a large team. Himself, Jed helps to keep couples married. This man's vision of relationship development, his concept of the 5 stages that all lovers experience, seems so plausible that it's impossible not to share it with you, even though it has no scientific or statistical basis. Again, this division has the potential to upend the way you think about your own relationships. According to Diamond, any love relationship goes through 5 standard stages. The 3rd stage, disappointment, is the most difficult, but if you manage to survive it in the final stage, you together can make a scientific revolution, create a successful business. You can roll mountains. The 1st stage is falling in love. From a biological point of view, falling in love is just a trick of evolution to bring 2 people together to continue the human race. Stage 2, the creation of a couple. At this stage, the feelings of the lovers become deeper. They have common goals, and eventually, they form a strong couple and one day get married. At the same time, they have children. They have a common household. Couples start planning for the future. This moment of the relationship is liked much more, because it is now that they feel that their love is more stable than ever, and nothing can change it anymore. But this is a big mistake. Stage 3, disappointment. There is irritation and almost physical rejection of each other. It comes out of the blue. Gradually, you begin to feel genuine disgust for the one who once considered ideal. It plays out differently in different couples. Someone runs away from each other at the first serious rift, and someone lives with a sense of total dissatisfaction for years. We even know when divorces usually occur. The global average is 8 to 9 years. If you look at social surveys, people there usually say something like, "We just didn't hit it off." As in any organized system, marriages too can have objective, you might say, phase failures. Diamond experienced 2 divorces and realized it only on the 3rd, when he and his wife made a fundamental decision to work on the relationship and not to separate, no matter how difficult it was for them. The 3rd stage of a relationship can be compared to a virus, overcoming which everything can change. At the 3rd stage, lovers stop seeing each other as an ideal. Before them appears an ordinary man. Love without the help of hormones and illusions is not easy, but possible. In fact, only here, the real love begins. After all, only after the 3rd stage, you begin to accept each other as you really are, wholly and completely. Stage 4, true, lasting love. After all the storms accompanying the 3rd stage have receded, the stage of deep and thorough reflection begins. The 2 of you begin to carefully analyze what happened to you before and why the relationship was destabilized. During this period, you get to know each other better than ever. After all, often the cause of problems in relationships lies in childhood. In the 4th stage of the relationship, people become psychologists for each other. The traumas experienced in childhood, parental divorce, domestic abuse, adultery, directly affect how a person will behave when they grow up. Your bond becomes so deep that you mutually begin to heal each other's wounds. And this not only makes the bond between you stronger, it negates any potential conflict, because both of you will already know the exact cause, how it will all unfold, if it will, and how it can be avoided. And the final 5th stage is absolute love. Love that can change the world. Not everyone reaches this stage. Not everyone needs it. After all, many couples who go through a crisis prefer to stay at the 4th stage of the relationship for the rest of their lives, and this is their personal business. Still, if your love is so strong that it can extend to the world around you, why not use this power? The point is this: the 2 of you have overcome so many problems and obstacles on the way to happiness, and you haven't given up. A couple moving to the 5th stage begins to think about how to use all their experience for the benefit of others. This calm focus pours out first in helping their children, relatives. Later, absolute love pushes people to create charitable organizations, common business, to start doing creative work together. Love becomes so strong that you have no need to nourish it. Already, it logically seeks outlets in good deeds. This is the stage, the summation of all the years of the relationship, when love becomes something that can change the world. Marie and Pierre Curie met in a lab at the Sorbonne in Paris when they were poor chemistry students, but through their unbreakable bond, they built a harmonious life together. They were both mesmerized by a shared scientific dream. This dream took many forms, from the study of radioactivity to the discovery of radium and polonium. Each of the Curie couple realized that they could not have achieved such a result on their own. On a rainy day, on April 19, 1906, Pierre Curie tragically died when, crossing the street in Paris, slipped and fell under a horse-drawn carriage. After Pierre's death, Marie continued to pursue their shared dream, and 5 years later she won a second Nobel Prize in 1919. You've probably noticed that some lovers often use the pronoun we rather than I when talking about themselves. They often stay very close to each other. They automatically hold hands. They take their partner's victories as their own. It costs them nothing to give up something of value or tolerate some discomfort if it implies some benefit to the relationship. This is more than empathy. It is the result of what psychologists call self-expansion. The theory of self-expansion was developed by social psychologists, husband and wife Arthur and Elaine Aron. It includes two postulates about human nature. The first one is as follows. People have an innate drive for self-expansion and realize this drive by following their curiosity, improving their abilities, and the second, in which the view of self expands to include another person. For them, the I becomes a we. Albert Einstein experienced self-expansion with his first wife, Serbian mathematician Mileva Marić. His sense of self was so closely tied to hers that at each separation, it was as if he was not himself. He wrote to her as follows: "When we are not together, I feel incomplete. When I sit down, I want to walk. When I walk, I want to go home. When I am entertained, I want to work. When I work, I cannot sit still." The impulse towards self-expansion explains why, in research, people are particularly attracted to potential partners who have a quality they themselves would like to possess, and which is inherent in their idealized self. Self-expansion is essentially a metaphor, an abstraction, and metaphorical thinking is the responsibility of a cognitive area called the angular gyrus. It's a very interesting part of the brain. The angular gyrus is one of the few higher-order cortical areas. That is, it is far above the more primitive ancient subcortical areas of the emotional brain. What's the best way to study an area of the brain? Very simply by studying patients with damage to that area. That's it. Patients with damage to the angular gyrus often lose the ability to understand speech or perform simple arithmetic operations. In addition, we know that only great apes have an angular gyrus. This means that it was one of the last areas of the brain to evolve. We also know that it's activated when people think creatively, make unexpected associations, or compare facts in new ways. The irrefutable link between intelligence and love. So what conclusion can we draw? Abiogenesis, the transformation of non-living matter into living matter, and then endosymbiosis set in motion, a process of increasing complexity through adaptation. This gave rise to sexual reproduction, which accelerated the overshoot of genetic variation. The polarity of male and female throughout history provided living matter with variability that at one point forced living things to be side by side, to help and evolve together. No matter what terrible times humanity has experienced, love has never receded. Love is when 1 + 1 is not 2. It is, so to speak, going through life not alone, but as a team. Love is the process of strengthening life, the process of seizing an opportunity that came from a surprisingly small planet in a cold, vast space. By betting on love, we are betting on life. When we bet on war, we bet on death, and death is very boring. Darkness is far from the diversity born of love. That is why there is no need to be skeptical of the idea that in union, a social animal like man can reach a new stage of evolution. This video was created with love. Anyway, thank you very much.